The exposure triangle is what we're talking about today. This video is going to cover aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. If you don't know what those are, I'm gonna explain to you what they are. So if you're new to photography, or maybe you're just getting started and it might be confusing, because photography is not just being creative and having an eye for it. There's a lot of technical aspects to photography. You need to know how to use your camera. And yes, you can pick up a camera and use aperture priority or any of the other like pre-made functions on your camera, but what you really want to do, if you want to know your camera, have control over your images, is you need to shoot manual mode. So turn the dial to M for manual, not Manuel, and let's learn about manual mode. How exciting. The most basic things that you will adjust throughout a photo session or whatever you are doing, whatever you are photographing, the three key elements to manual mode are ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Aperture is basically how wide the lens is gonna open when you take a picture. And by the way, when you're looking at lenses and it says like, we'll take the 50 millimeter 1.4 for example. When you see the lens and it says 50 millimeter f/1.4, that means the highest aperture for that lens is going to be 1.4. A 1.4 aperture, if you focus that on a subject, say you're a portrait photographer, probably focus on the person's eye. Everything on that plane is going to be sharp and in focus. With a 1.4 aperture, everything before the subject and everything behind the subject, you're gonna have a lot of bokeh. Bokeh, by the way, is just the blurriness that you see in the background. Wherever your focal point is going to be very crisp and sharp in the image, and everything else is going to be blurry and really beautiful. So 1.4, it's weird with aperture. The higher numbers is a lower aperture, but the lower numbers is a higher aperture. So 1.4 is a really high aperture. That lens is gonna be open. But if you go to like f/22, your aperture is 22, lens is not gonna open as much. The depth of field is going to be less shallow. Everything is going to be in focus on an f/22. So if you're like a landscape photographer, you're likely most times going to shoot at a really low aperture. So larger apertures are the smaller numbers. f/1.2, 1.4, 1.8, these are really high apertures. And as far as, say you're a portrait photographer, for example, if you have, a large group that you want to take pictures of, some people say, well, can I stay at a 1.4 aperture? Well, probably not, because you're going to have some people out of focus and some people in focus. That's another conversation for another video. And if you're interested in seeing a video like that, let me know in the comments. Now, ISO is all about light sensitivity. Each camera handles light differently. Let's take the Rebel T5 as an example. The lowest ISO I had was 100, and then the highest was 3600. 100, out of all of those options for ISO, is going to help capture a really bright scene much better. If you have an ISO of 1200, for example, and it's a bright sunny day, high sun, no clouds, that image is going to be so overexposed, which basically means everything is going to be white and really bright, and you're not going to have any detail in the image, and just delete it at that point. And as you go on, as you learn how these settings, go together and work together, you're going to know what to adjust. So say I had an ISO 400, and then I go from indoors where it might be a little darker to outdoors where it's really bright and sunny. I'm gonna know, hey, I need to up my ISO. I need to bring my ISO to 100 because it's really bright. When I go inside though, and maybe I don't want to turn on any lights because they're gonna be super yellowy orange, maybe I only want to use natural window light. Maybe I want to diffuse it with some curtains or something. I'm probably going to bump my ISO up to maybe 400, 800, depending on the lighting situation inside the building. And grain or noise is what happens when you increase your ISO. So if you're going and you have an ISO of 1600, 3200 or above, you're gonna have some grain. And it's not a bad thing. Grain is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's a stylistic choice and sometimes you want grain. But just know, as you raise your ISO, the darker it is, the more likely you're gonna have grain or noise in an image. Last setting we're gonna talk about is shutter speed. It sounds like what it is. It's how fast the shutter in your camera is going to close and open. A slow shutter speed is going to make everything really blurry. With a fast shutter speed, like we're talking 1/500, 1/1000, and more than that, you're freezing motion. So a lot of times with portrait photography, I will have a higher shutter speed because people move. There's a lot of movement with portrait photography. I want to freeze the motion and capture the motion, and I don't want things to be blurry most of the time. So I'm going to have a faster shutter speed. How do all these settings work together? This is where practice will help you. I really learn the best when I go out and I fail. I go out, I try something, I fail miserably, and then I come back with an understanding of what I did wrong. Even if you feel like you can't grasp the concept of all of the technicalities that are behind using a camera and photography in general, go out and practice. Over time, you are going to know, it's going to be second nature. You're not even going to think about it. You're going to be, if you're a portrait photographer and you have, just one person that you're taking pictures of, you can go down to like the 1.8, 1.4, 1.2 aperture. But then whenever 10 of their closest friends come in, we're going to have to increase that aperture so everybody can be in focus, because they're likely going to have to stand either in front of or behind the main person that you were originally taking images of. When we want to go out and get that long exposure of a waterfall and have a really just creamy waterfall falling down, we know we're going to drop our shutter speed down super low and put our camera on a tripod so we don't have camera shake and the thing ends up blurry anyways. We know we're going to lower the shutter speed so we can get that creamy waterfall look. So how do we learn to do all this together? The best way to learn is just to practice. Get your camera, put it in manual mode. Don't be scared. Take a deep breath and go use your camera. Go take pictures of things. It feels like a lot to understand, but I promise the more that you get your camera out, you go and challenge yourself to learn these settings, you go out and practice, and you fail, and you practice and fail, and then you practice again. It's going to come to you second nature eventually. You're just going to understand it. You can do it and you're smart. And if you like photography or graphic design or anything art, maybe subscribe, think about it, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.